Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I thought this video would need a little bit of context and somewhat of an introduction. So the reason I've made this video is because there seems to be a growing contingent of people that are using or referring to the 1215 Magna Carta and something called Article 61. They use this to call themselves free men of the land or sovereign citizens, which to me appears to be somewhat of an oxymoron. But I digress. Now, me being me, I very much understand the importance of attention to detail. When I started doing my own research, I actually found that I believe rhetoric has been regurgitated and some sort of Chinese whispers might have happened around this movement. I also definitely believe there to be some charlatans involved that are trying to sell you a solution that doesn't quite exist. Now, what I'm going to do in this video is tell you the history behind Magna Carta, what led up to it, the Barons' Wars, and how King John came to sign it under duress. But to even understand how this all came about, we must first understand the Plantagenet dynasty, who King John was, who his siblings was, and his lineage. So this will all be explained. Now, it would appear when I do try and contact these groups, I seem to get banned. I thought I was polite enough. It appears what I say is very uncomfortable. Well, the truth is uncomfortable. So, let's begin. Born in 1166 on Christmas Eve, John was the youngest of 8 siblings to Henry II. John's brothers were Henry the Young King, who died very early on, Richard the Lionheart, and Geoffrey, who went on to become Duke of Brittany. John being the youngest meant that he wasn't given any notable inheritance. What he did acquire though was the nickname John Lackland, because he did actually lack any land. To rectify this, his father did actually entrust him with the title Lord of Ireland, and in 1185 he was sent to Ireland with the task of becoming king there. However, due to naivety, his inexperience, and quite frankly an overly tyrannical attitude, this venture only lasted 4 months. He'd upset the nobility and the barons, so much so that they completely rejected him and they sent him back. Had this actually worked out, history would have looked very different, as it would have created 2 Plantagenet kingdoms. But as we'll find out, this would end up just being one of many things that King John didn't get right. It's important to note that John's family relations were always pretty chaotic. He gained a reputation quite early on of treachery, in many cases conspiring against his father, and sometimes with or against his own siblings. During the reign of Richard the Lionheart, it's well known that he was an important figure of the Third Crusade. This meant that Richard was absent from England for 4 whole years. On his return from the crusade, Richard was captured in Austria and imprisoned. He was held captive by the Roman Emperor. So, John, being the cowardly opportunist that he was, used this time to try and overthrow William Longchamp, which was Richard's justiciar. To me and you, that'd be sort of like a prime minister. John even pleaded for his brother to be incarcerated much longer. Fortunately, however, Richard's supporters gathered enough silver to pay for his ransom. Anything, basically, to stop John taking the throne. On Richard's return to England, much to everyone's surprise, he actually forgave John and merely described him as juvenile. Preceding his forgiveness, Richard then made John his heir to the throne. Richard then spent most of his years in France securing territories. That is, until one day, whilst sieging a castle in Chalus, he was struck by an arrow in his shoulder that later became infected and led to his very unexpected death. John had to act quickly and was subsequently crowned king on May 27, 1199 at Westminster Abbey. The only other heir to the throne was John's nephew Arthur. The threat from Arthur became very serious when he allied himself with King Philip Augustus of France. So, in one of King John's only successful military tirades, he actually captured and kidnapped his very own nephew Arthur. He imprisoned Arthur in Rouen in France. Arthur later died under very suspicious circumstances. It's rumoured and mostly believed that in a very drunken rage, King John actually bludgeoned him to death. Now this would turn out to obviously be a really terrible idea. Arthur, it seems, would have actually been King John's bartering tool. John was gaining a reputation of arbitrarily starting wars with France. He kept losing loads of territories, and every single time, the King of France would often try and barter, but he wanted Arthur. And John obviously couldn't produce Arthur. Therefore, this resulted in John losing Normandy, for example, and lots of other territories. This cost England so much money. And back in a feudal system, it was often the barons and the nobility that had to pay for these wars, making John a very unpopular king. So, now that we know who King John was, let's get on to the most pertinent part of the story, and this is actually his feud with Pope Innocent III. This is all in regards to who should be Archbishop of Canterbury. Now this feud actually got so intense that the Pope actually made Christendom in England go on strike. There were no masses, there were no ringings of the bells for at least 6 years. It then all started falling apart for King John, and there's a bit of a twist to the story in what he did and what led up to the signing of Magna Carta. Enjoy. John was becoming less and less popular quite rapidly. After the death of Hubert Walter, a conflict immediately arose regarding who should be the new Archbishop of Canterbury. The Pope suggested to elect Stephen Langton. However, King John was so against this that he actually seized all the provinces from Canterbury, and he excluded all the monks. In turn, this wasn't received very well by the papacy at all. So, Pope Innocent III decided to put England under interdict. This basically meant that any sermons, mass or praise went on strike. Now you can imagine, in a Christian country, that didn't go down too well. And it would look like King John I was slowly becoming King John the Worst. Not only did King John have the entire Holy Roman Papacy against him, his barons also weren't best pleased. John had spent years arbitrarily taxing them with no gain. So, feeling defeated, there was only one option, and rebellion was afoot. The barons took siege of Rochester Castle, one of the bravest and boldest moves ever seen in a feudal system. The absolute utter disdain that his own nobility showed him speaks absolute volumes of King John's character. What King John did next actually worked in his favour, and it was one of the rare times that he actually played the game smart. Feeling mounting pressure from the barons, the papacy, and everyone in the country basically hated King John. John decided to concede to the papacy, but this wasn't any ordinary concession. He actually gave the Pope loads of territories from England and more power than Christendom already had, which was a lot, by the way. This was a very smart move because it basically meant that any rebellion barons, it wasn't down to King John anymore. It was down to the Pope. Therefore, when the Magna Carta was signed and sealed, it was annulled by Pope Innocent III, and it was perfectly legal to do so. Now that we know what led up to Magna Carta, who it was signed by and why, let's now take a closer inspection into who wrote it, what it actually says, and what it means today. It's very important to realise the time. This was under a feudal system, and it was about feudal customs. Very different from today. So let's take a look. Lawful rebellion groups often cite something called Article 61. Now, upon further research, I actually found that there is no such thing as Article 61. There is something called Clause 61, which I will now read and recite in full. Clause 61 of Magna Carta. Since we have granted all these things for God, for the better ordering of our kingdom, and to end the disagreement that has arisen between us and our barons, we agree that all the barons shall elect 25 of their number to watch over and keep the peace and liberties granted and confirmed to them by this. Someone please tell me what that has to do with lawful rebellion or you being a free man of the land. The people that have recited this stuff to you, they're either charlatans or very, very misinformed. Better yet, this makes something very pertinently clear. Parliament's own website states very clearly that there are 4 clauses that currently exist and are recognised in English law. These are 1, 13, 39 and 40. What is great about these clauses that do exist is it states that every man, regardless of class system, has the right to a fair trial. So, there we are. What's really important to note is that the 1215 Magna Carta, of course, is an incredibly important document. In fact, it is the foundation of most of the world's current constitutions, for example, anywhere in the Commonwealth and even America to an extent. However, it is so important that you know what it really is and what it means in current day. There are people out there, some I believe have just been fed misinformation and regurgitated it. I'm not blaming anyone, I'm not trying to discredit anyone, I'm just saying it's very convoluted information, right? And it might sound great, and lots of people are selling you a solution that doesn't quite exist. Now, of course, as I've explained, it was repealed by the Pope. It even says on Parliament's own website that the 1215 Magna Carta points of it, they don't exist in law. The 4 clauses that I've shown that do reside in English law are very important, but we have to note that it's from the 1297 final rewrite. Things like Article 61, loads of these quoted clauses, while they were of course relevant for the history and the time, they will not help you in court or anything. And you have to understand, anyone that has ever tried to use anything from the 1215 Magna Carta in a court of law, it has never worked. There has never been one single case where any judge has recognised this stuff, ever. Important though it may be, people that talk about this 1215 Magna Carta, right, as a history buff, it's so important to learn about. As someone trying to use it against the legal system now, you're going to get in trouble. And it's just going to bite you on the arse, and it's just not going to help you. And unfortunately, I've seen this happen. So when I've tried to discuss this over the years, people have called me all sorts of names. Shill and whatever else that people usually do. So I thought I'd make this to not start an argument, but just to lay out in the most simplest terms the truth of the entire matter. Now, I know what people are going to say to me, and it will be things like, no, it can't ever be void because of what I said. Listen, that's not how constitutions work. Like, for example, in the American Constitution, they have amendments, right? It can be amended. The 1215 Magna Carta is not the word of God. It was written by 25 feudal barons. It wasn't for the peasantry, it was for the nobility, and it's not what you think it is. It didn't give people really much power, at all. Also, if you do put all your faith and power into this, this must mean that you give up your freedom to barons. There are currently over 400 bloodline barons in the UK today, and they're not your friend. So this isn't a solution. I would suggest things that do work, like common law and the Bill of Rights, things that actually exist in English law. And if it's relevant to a case, use those 4 clauses from the 1297 Magna Carta that do exist. Thanks very much for watching. This has been one of the most arduous tasks I've ever had to do. Without further ado, here are the credits. But most of all, thank you for watching.